Do you ever yearn?
There's a total disconnect now between the ruling group and the masses.
I hate psychology.
Clear out.
They're the same worm-like characters.
Analysts,
Fuck you with your stupid argument.
they should not bother us.
Democracy.
All of this just works.
But for the generations that are coming.
Fully dynamic game engine.
A millennial video essayist.
Always support strength
Constant craving.
and identity.
I haven't yearned. They are a disease of our time.
Clear them out. You're voting for what your grandfather and father fought for.
I sit and yearn.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Longhouse, the weekly show for the sensible centrist. With me today, as always, I have my co-host Ludwig Path. How are you doing?
Thank you. Doing well. Nice and caffeinated, and happy to be back.
You're ready to go after the cold posters?
Yeah, I'm ready to go. And we're having Nathan CJ Hood returning this time to talk about Arthur Day. How are you doing, Nathan?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm delighted to be back on the Longhouse.
Yeah, it's great. It's we were talking before the show. The last time you were officially on the Longhouse was chimpanzee politics with Newt Gingrich. Is that it?
That's right. He was the man who brought chimpanzees into the American politics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was a good
literally,
stream,
by
I
the
hear.
way.
Literally, yeah.
It's a very specific lore that's been forgotten, I think, by many Americans. But at one point in the 90s, politics in America was literally just chimpanzees fighting in Congress.
But also, we got to see some shots of him, looking at the monkeys at the zoo.
That's right.
Having
Didn't
a
he?
nice-
He took care of them, right? He used to feed them and things like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Very odd.
So, first of all, I would like you to tell everyone, and you're going to get the opportunity later as well. I want you to tell everyone listening about the Arthur Day project you're doing, Nathan.
Yes, thank you. So on the 25th of May, Saturday the 25th of May, I'm going to be running King Arthur Day. Now, this is very like what I've done with Tolkien Day and Wagner Day last year. It's going to be an opportunity for a lot of different creators to come together and produce videos, streams, original artwork, stories, exploring and celebrating the traditions surrounding King Arthur. And I mean, for a bit of context, in case somebody doesn't know, the stories around King Arthur go back 1,500 years. They don't just belong to Britain. They span Christendom. And there's something about this character which has captured the imaginations of many people, from Edward I, who we've just got a picture of just now, all the way down to Victorian pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood artists, to Monty Python even. So this is a chance to kind of wrestle with, why is this figure so enduring? What is it about him that speaks to our souls? What is it about him that expresses something of the Christendom spirit? So that's what we're going to be doing. And we already have quite a good lineup of people. But if anybody's interested in contributing, they're more than welcome to send me a DM and we'll talk about it.
Very good. Yes, it's interesting how much of an archetype the character has sort of become in our culture, to the point where, characters I don't necessarily think of as coming from King Arthur actually does. Once you spend a minute thinking about it, it's like, oh wait, hang on, that's just the knight archetype, and then you're like one step removed, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm very looking forward to that.
Awesome.
Okay. So you had some tweets as well this week in regards to the future of society, the challenges that we face, and that's something that we're going to get into in a little while. But before that, Ludwig Path has been doing his job as the World Economic Forum's strongest soldier here on the Longhouse, and he's been taking the fight to the BRICS posters on Twitter. And I have to say, Ludwig, I told you before the show, I wasn't really aware at how I don't like necessarily to use the word coal. I would just call it low quality. A lot of the posts some of these accounts make. Why don't you enlighten us a bit about what you found?
I feel a little bit bad now, right? Because we were spitballing about what topic we were going to cover on the episode, and I was going to go through like my Twitter backlog of things, but then you said we're going to have Nathan CJ Hood on, and then it's going to be this weird mix of like highbrow content with the sort of like lowbrow coal content that I'm coming with now. But I just wanted to do like a small sort of segment, you could call it a little bit of a PSA to the audience that would work as a continuation of the last episode for the people who are wondering why I'm sort of so obsessed with all of this kind of Russia stuff. I mean, for the listeners who are not aware, like you have the concept of BRICS now, right? That it's an abbreviation for, let's say, Brazil, India, China, Russia, and I got them in South Africa, right? That's now, it's something that was started up as just an investment group, but it's been turned into more of this kind of geopolitical alliance between some of these non-Western powers that it's supposed to be like a rival group to the G7 countries and like the EU, NATO, etc. And I mean, because I'm looking at this stuff on Twitter, and there's a very deliberate effort, not just from the Russian angle, from like the Chinese angle and the Indian angle, to influence people in our spheres. Like historically, countries like Russia and China, they've struggled with soft power. This is something we've talked about with, say, like the Prudentialist, if you're familiar with geopolitical academic concepts, but really the idea of producing culture, you could say, or something that is compelling in a way that you could get followers and support from other countries. And this has always been difficult for Russia and for China, but I'm seeing like with particularly the climate and the dialectic that's going on in the United States and the broader West with the culture war and the sort of woke, anti-woke back and forth. It's sort of a perfect storm where you see how these BRICS countries have been able to create all this sort of content to try to message and propose to a lot of disaffected Westerners, in a sense. And it's something that I'm focusing more in on, because I feel like there's a lot of awareness on, like what you'd consider regime propaganda internally in the West. And we're sitting and debunking, media, fact checkers all day. But it's very easy then to just kind of uncritically swallow some of this kind of anti-Western propaganda that's being pushed into the sandwich with everything else. Maybe you could look up, because I posted some tweets in the private chat here.
Sure. You sent a barrage of tweets, I would say, my way. Which one would you like?
Yeah, just do the first one, just so I could, because I feel like it's a very nice tweet to
the West versus East?
the West versus East one.
Okay. Let's see here. Zoom in. Then we have BRICS News posting West versus East. You have probably some.
This is big like Twitter channel with a Twitter account with almost 300,000 followers. Many people in our spheres follow this, so these kind of adjacent accounts. And you're seeing here, like, they've just put two pictures. One of this is where you have the American military, like with the transvestite with the pride flags there, and on the other side you have the fierce-looking Asian soldiers, like from China. And the standard thing, like, I mean, of course, if you look at the replies for this stuff, it's always like the same kind of African accounts that just keeps posting. I mean, I looked at a lot of the posts.
The future.
Yeah, it's a sort of same kind of African accounts that are always giving the supportive things, but you see, like, this gets a lot of eyeballs. And I commented on this previously, like the messaging here, And of course, this is not something that's happening with every post, but it's a very typical pattern that it's very targeted at American conservatives, like this American culture war, anti-woke, conservative archetype of a person, and really not at all at people who live in India or Russia or something like this. It would almost seem a little bit weird because they post about Joe Biden quite a bit, even though, let's say, the US is not a BRICS country, or they post about Israel. Israel's not a BRICS country, but they keep posting about Joe Biden is doing transgender day of visibility. What do you think of this? And they get this kind of standard responses. And it's always framed in this way, like, yeah, the West is, degenerate, and, the East is like this up and coming power in a sense. So this is just kind of what I wanted to create some awareness of in our spaces, with just try to avoid this sort of demoralization porn that's just being pushed out into various, crevices of the internet. Maybe you could look at one of these, the other account there with the one about marrying the people, coming into China to marry, to marry the chains of the world.
We can have a look at that. One moment. Which one was that? It's the Married to China. Here it is. Bring it up on the screen. According to the Ministry of Civil Affairs, the number of foreigners who marry to China has far exceeded that of the Chinese who marry to foreign countries. And then, some woman posting. Oh, there's some music as well. Don't want to get. She's just posting about. I guess that's her husband, right? Blonde Western woman, and I feel, it's been sort of a mainstay in my mind. A tweet you did like a month ago or something at this point, which you called Ludwig's Law, which is, if I remember correctly, it's that any dissident content sooner or later becomes indistinguishable from cuckold porn.
Yeah, I mean, Nordanon's commenting that she's wearing the trad wife dress, and there's something very overt. Yeah, she's wearing the literal trad wife archetype here. So it's this, it's
this
easy
might
to think
actually, at this point, it might actually be a Chinese op, right?
Yeah. I mean,
sounds like it. Yeah.
I'm again just showing this stuff here just to have people be aware of it and be able to look at this stuff critically, even though we are very critical of we got our beautiful Chinese mixed families there. It's very nice, very demoralizing. So we're not going to spend too much time on that, but that's I think that's the daily dose of coal, and then we could move on to talk about something more a little bit more highbrow.
Yes. No, but quite honestly, that BRICS news account is something you should probably stay away from. It's just sad. Another thing, while we're on the topic, was it's not that account, but I saw this one, which also made the rounds. You might laugh seeing a photo of people sleeping on their desk, but let me explain. Work ethics are unbeaten in China. They get into the office around 8 a.m. They take a 30-minute nap around 1 p.m., like seen in this photo, and they power through till 11 p.m. Yet in Europe, everyone is bitching about wanting a smoke break every 30 minutes. And the big sort of jeopardy question here is, what is marginal productivity, right? Because China is just purely, as a nation, the throw more bodies at the problem, right? And has always been that way. And I keep going back to this old 4chan post which just says that they're just like ants, like the green quotes. And I'm sorry to say, but that's sort of like how their society is structured. It seems.
But you see, the guy posting this, I figured out he's from the Netherlands, and he sort of moved down to China to be an entrepreneur, business leader. And I'm not even sure what the purpose of posting this was, because the Noranon comments, at least in Japan, they provide their wages with a room to sleep in at work. Yeah, they don't have that. You couldn't even do that. So
superior Japan. Yeah,
I mean, I was wondering, like, why he would even post something like this if he doesn't have the self-awareness to see how awful this comes across. Because I'm seeing so much of that on Twitter that, at some time you have to learn, the expected response that you get, and stuff like this just gets swarmed by right-wing accounts almost every time if you look at like the quote tweets or something. But yeah, the first thing is like the marginal productivity argument, which for those not familiar is that, when you're working at like the 12th, 13th, 14th hour, you get nothing done, right? At some point you get nothing out of putting more into it. I mean, the typical example is really Germans, which, I mean, Germany is like one of the most productive countries, or not anymore, but they have typically had one of the most productive manufacturing sectors in the world, and they've limited their workdays to 8 hours and no overtime. And like the German emphasis has always been that, okay, if you couldn't do it in 8 hours, you have to find out a more productive way to use those 8 hours next day instead of using more time, because using more time doesn't mean more productivity. So that's the first point.
This is basic sort of business and economics. I mean, the work needing done at some point. There's, you can't just keep applying, manpower to solve a problem, right? It's not enough space, right? Let's say I mean, the classic example is like you own, let's say you own like a food truck, right? And you can't just keep hiring people because there's only room for like 2 people in the food truck, right?
Exactly. And I mean, there's also the problem. We're talking about the Chinese fertility rates, how it's so low, right? And if this is the way they approach work, like they're putting in like 14-hour days. I don't exactly know when these babies are supposed to be made. Like when are they going to have time to even take care of their kids or have families at all if you're going to basically be living wagey at this point? So there's the other problem, is that you're shooting yourself in the foot in the long term. If you're going like this, you're just sort of shredding human capital by the pound.
Yeah,
so to speak.
It's just something about, bringing up something like this, a nation like this, a culture like this, which is very much incompatible with us in a lot of ways, in almost every way, and then holding that up as some sort of like, if only we were more like them. It just rubs me the wrong way.
It's interesting though, because I think like you compared it to like the ant colony. You could also see it like basically human beings are machine parts that just have to slot into the system, right? And so we just get as much out of them as we possibly can and then dispose of. And in China, I guess that's being reflected in the move towards automation. You're literally being replaced by machines now, machine parts. But in the West, I would argue that a lot of the political class do see us just as parts of a machine and interchangeable with other parts. So I can see why this sort of argument might appeal to a large portion of the political class. I don't get why they're trying to target the right wing with this kind of stuff, because they're like the least likely to appreciate it.
I think maybe from like a business aspect of, I think they're even a little bit late out with that. But I've seen stuff like this, maybe 10 years ago, where the entrepreneurs will come out and talk about, if you want hardworking employees to work for cheap, then you can do that in China, and you're going to have less restrictions on what you can do and so on. So that's I mean, especially in the America sphere, where they have the value of hard work, and they also do work a lot of overtime. I think it's easy to sell this into an American as they're doing what you're doing but better. Of course, the output doesn't represent that. So, like, I think people commented that as well. Like, you look at the Chinese output, the amount of like cheap knockoff copy products that they're producing, they're like putting so much time just to produce this kind of low quality junk that you get on Alibaba Express or some kind of platform like this. So it's very interesting how much time you can put into just creating subpar outputs.
I think there's a tweet here that Burkhall retweeted from I'm not sure who it is, William Gaius or something. Yeah. Just like this Giga Chad Frenchman edit, which I thought was pretty good. And he says, "What are you doing? I told you the smoke break is over." "Excusez-moi, I did not know this. I just finished my breakfast cigarette." "But you need to get back to work." "Ça va, but I eat lunch now." "China has better work ethic. I will be back at the office après 16 for le café." It's it got me laughing. Yeah. Let's sort of do a bit of a tangent on that stuff into, I guess, our main topic for tonight, and to introduce it, or to get us into the mindset, because we talked about sort of the issue facing a lot of the Western countries earlier on the Longhouse in terms of like elder care, etc., in terms of sustaining growth, in terms of sustaining everything that we have. And I was a bit on the nose when I called this Malthusian, but it seems like this sort of snake is eating its own tail as well, because it's impacting the young people as well. And it's something you tweeted about, I think, Nathan, that got me thinking about this. So we'll just start from this article and we'll see where it takes us. Oops, sorry. And we also have your tweet, Nathan, if we need it. And I think you also sent me an article about birth rates in England or Britain. So this is an article that is sourced from Denmark, but of course it's being run through a translator from Norwegian. So I'm going to do my best as usual to para-translate. Bonus points for anyone following on screen. They will be interviewing a person in here who prefer to be referred to as a they. You can put your comments in whether or not you think it's a he or a she. Mathilde Schelde is 23 years old and thought that their situation was unique. Then they wrote a book called The Rest. Let's see here. It's not very cool to be called a residual group in society. None of us has asked to be left alone. To be the leftovers, says Mathilde Schelde. The Danish 23-year-old shows us around their cramped collective in the capital's notorious Istegate. I'm not sure where that is, but whatever. Sex workers and drug addicts used to live here for many years. And every month they receive support from the state. Barely covers rent and their meals. And let's see what the translator is doing here. It barely covers food and meals when they can bear to shop for food. Maybe they're tired or something. That's the translation. The 23-year-old who wants to be referred to as gender neutral does not have a job and is not studying. In Denmark, these young adults are called the rest group, or more appropriately, the leftover group. The proportion of young people who are excluded has fallen slightly or remained stable in most European countries over the past 10 years. In Great Britain, the proportion of young people outside of normal society has grown after the pandemic, despite the fact that working life is practically crying out for labor. At the same time, the proportion of young people with mental disorders, which is something we talked about last week, has increased sharply. This worries the authorities in multiple places. Why is Europe unable to help the young? Aftenposten has spoken to experts in several countries, and they describe a group of young people with very different challenges. Some drop out of primary school early. Some have reduced functional capacity. Common for many is that they have mental disorders. That's what researcher Knut Rød at the Frisch Center in Oslo says. There is something happening in the youth's environment related to interaction between mental health and later participation in the labor market, and this is worrying, he says. Young people with disabilities have been a hot topic of debate in Norway recently. The last 10 years alone, the proportion of disabled young people in Norway has more than doubled. Schelde felt for a long time that it says she. Let's see what the translator is being a bit sexist here, or transphobic. Is that the word? Yeah, because the Norwegian is using a gender-neutral pronoun. It's using a newspeak word, and the translator isn't picking up, so it's calling them she. Let's see here. Schelde felt for a long time that she did not fit into the so-called residual group. And then you go back to he completed upper secondary school with top grades. But going to school felt like a perpetual marathon with a high pulse. And he was gone for about a third of the time. Already when he was 10 years old, the stress and depression started. For several years, Sheldon tries to ask for help, he claims. But since I was so academically strong, everyone thought I was doing well, says Matilda Sheldon. It wasn't until high school that he was taken seriously. When I entered psychiatry, I was completely at rock bottom. And later it turned out that he is autistic and has ADHD. I want to point out for the people in the chat, that's another point for the crossover of autism and transgenderism, by the way. It is undefeated as a correlator. Later, let's see here, he started university despite mental problems, but then the suicidal thoughts kicked in and he was forcibly hospitalized. Hang on a moment. I mean, I'm trying to think. No, that would be allowed in Norway as well, even if you had, because being autistic and having ADHD wouldn't stop you from going to university. I just had a thought that if you're suicidal, I'm not sure if you're going to get government benefits to study. Like, Pat, do you know anything about that in Norway?
I never filled out that on a form, honestly.
Me neither.
I don't know how that is translated through the system. I think I never heard of them refusing it to suicidal people. So
they probably wouldn't. That's true. Yeah, it's probably irrelevant, right? Let's see here. Sheldon moved home with his parents and stopped his studies. Okay. For a long time, Sheldon believed that it was her own fault that she ended up outside the system. But then he wrote the book, The Rest, or The Leftovers, The Remainers, together with 14 other people. And she joins a gloomy development in society, at least on paper. The proportion of mental health problems is increasing. Many countries report more young people with depression in 2019 than 2014. Antidepressants are taking like never before. What's funny is that he's sort of like writing it like we're popping pills like never before. More young people report dissatisfaction and bullying at school. It's interesting. The bullying thing is interesting because I do remember bullying happening when I went to school, which is not that sort of like, I'm not that far behind or sort of ahead, I suppose, of these people. Maybe like 5 to 10 years, right? To like Generation C. And I mean, there were bullying, but I didn't feel like there were increased bullying because what we got told was that bullying used to be worse.
I think so too. Actually, I think this is like the grape epidemic, where it's just been a kind of redefinition of what constitutes sexual assault. The same thing, like I think there's increased experience of bullying, but in terms of just a little bit more objective markers of what's actually going on there, it's a lot milder now. I mean, generally, just it's like that movie 21 Jump Street or something, where if you've seen it, the was it Channing Tatum or something, and Jonah Hill, they look young, so they have to go in as sort of undercover cops at the high school, right? But they went to high school 10 years prior, so they are coming in with like thinking that they're going to be cool and try to bully people, and they're meeting like the new cool kids. And actually now it's very popular to be environmentally conscious, to be vegan, and try to be compassionate and so on. But I mean, it's a bit on the nose, but I think it's at least when I've talked to teachers, it seems to be more true now. That I mean, if you were going to school in the 90s, that's when you talk about like bullying at a kind of real level. I mean, not just people. There was some more kind of residue of a world that was more physical, but there was also harder, like the culture. A lot of that. Like the suicide mania, the like the hard rock and metal music, and I'm not just like trying to blame that, but it was sort of in the zeitgeist at the time. A bit of that kind of cruelty and hardness was, it was a harder edge, I think, to
now it's just
youth culture.
You get some pills that sort of mellow you out, and you listen to Tame Impala or something.
Yeah, and you create a sort of personality around your pill popping. That's sort of what I see in youth culture now. That it's kind of like everybody wants to have like a 4-letter diagnosis or something, so you have that as a personality, and that's kind of a starting point for conversation and identification within the group instead of being something that excludes you.
Young people seeking help have increased sharply in several places. Almost half of all young people in the EU said that they do not get enough help to deal with their mental health problems. 23% of adults report the same challenges. Why are the young people left out? Researcher Knut Rød emphasizes that there is no definitive answer as to why young people develop mental health problems. Several of the reasons are disputed among researchers. Ryan Lowe is a psychotherapist and runs several clinics that help young people in London. She thinks the use of social media makes it difficult for young people to develop an identity. It can create more loneliness and pressure to appear successful. She points out that parents' dependence on the phone means that they are less present for their children than before. An increased pressure and stress at school, increased pressure in working life is highlighted here. Increased transparency about mental disorders in society is also highlighted as a reason. So that's more or less the article. It goes into a bit of the things we talked about last week about sort of this affecting a generation as a whole, but I don't really want to rehash that. The point is that this costs society quite a lot, and I don't necessarily want to reduce it just to economics, but according to state media in Norway, a young person ending up in disability costs the society an average of 15 million Norwegian kroner. You can divide that by 10, Nathan, you roughly get the pound. And not only that, it's also the lost sort of revenue, I suppose, or the lost labor or lost value that the person would have theoretically provided for society.
Don't you think that's computed into the sum, or is this just the autism?
Seems kind of strange that one person produces 15 million. I think a person produces a lot more in value than that, don't you?
Well, it does depend. I'm not sure, but I've seen a lot of those, cost society figures that usually do include some lost.
Okay. Well, let's assume it does
revenue.
that. Yeah. My point is roughly the same. It's a lot of money, and you have to basically take care of another person on top of having to take care of the old people, etc., etc. So these are problems that are becoming increasingly sort of acute, and we don't really have a way to deal with them. And I called this episode "Going Malthusian" because at some point it's going to have to give out, and then what? Otherwise, we might be able to leverage technology in a way that sort of lets us, just forget about this problem. But I'm growing increasingly unsure whether or not we're going to be able to do this. So to bring up your tweet for a moment, where did it go? I might have lost it. You had two. You had one about cars, I think, or about the line of progress, and then you had one about. This is very unprofessional of me.
I've put it in the private chat.
Ah, I see it. The plight of ordinary people.
Yes, that's the
there
one.
It is. And you said, if we really want to see the plight of ordinary people improve, we should embrace population decline. After the Black Death, a lot of the remaining peasant improvised. A shortage of labor enabled them to negotiate much better terms for their work, including being paid. And of course, you get some more discussion in the comments here. I encourage everyone to have a look. But the idea is that, I mean, if the fertility rates are falling apart, if we don't have the labor and can't get the labor, which it seems that it's not possible. I mean, we've tried immigration. That doesn't seem to work. I mean, even if you just, put aside all the issues of integration and multiculturalism, it seems like the people you immigrate that you import don't really want to do the work either. So they don't want to do the work of taking care of your grandpa, right? It's not a one-to-one. And the young people are falling out as well at an increasing rate. So you're sort of, the snake is eating itself, and both ends of the snake is being eaten at this point. And at some point it's going to have to give out, or most likely it's just going to have to slow down, is my theory. And I guess that's where we're at. What do you guys think about all this?
Well, I think it might be worth giving a bit of context about what I was saying about the Black Death there, because so obviously this was a plague which swept Europe and killed millions of people in a very short space of time, decimated certain towns and so on. In England, there's different kind of estimates, but you could suggest somewhere between 2 to 3 million people died from the Black Death, and that was the population was around 6 million. So it was a huge decrease. But society continued. And I think that's an important point to say first, because we live in a culture where everything's kind of predicated on, oh, we must keep growing the population. I keep hearing this in Britain. If we don't have population increases, everything's going to fall apart. Well, this was a 50% decrease in population, and they managed to survive. Not only that, but many of the people who did survive actually prospered, in part because there was a shortage of farm workers. For the first time, they were able to negotiate their wages. And if you look at 1381, when there was a census, an examination of wages, because they wanted to implement a tax, wages had almost doubled compared to 50 years before. Not only that, there was land available because lots of people had died off. There was free land to take. So many of the peasants became propertied. So these sorts of things, and prices went down because there's less people, there's less demand for food, so therefore the price has to fall to reflect that. So the population decline helped the lowest rung in society, you might say, or the ordinary people within England at that time. And so it just struck me, okay, we live in this culture where we're supposed to think population increase is the only way to solve or to improve our lives. But here's a pretty dramatic example or counterexample, which shows perhaps the opposite is the case. So that was kind of the motivation behind the tweet, in terms of trying to force people to think through, okay, is this actually the best solution? And in terms of all the things you've just outlined, in terms of, well, we're in a society which we've increasingly got fewer people running what's essential, and an increasing number of people who are being supported by that system. At some point, it's going to become unmanageable. Even if you're increasing the population, you're just adding to that other side rather than to those who are producing. And what's frustrating is actually we would be having a population decline if it wasn't for mass immigration, at least in the United Kingdom. So the natural effects which would benefit normal people are being prevented from happening through this process. It's like we're stuck. The natural process can't take place.
It's sort of being artificially kept afloat. The question is, because it's artificially being kept afloat, is the crash going to be harder than it would have been if it was natural? And that's where you get a lot of, issues with. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the documentary that was running on Norwegian state media, which highlighted a lot of accelerationist thinking, and that is pretty much, I'm oversimplifying a lot of accelerationism, but I believe that if this process was naturally allowed to take place, then the need for accelerationism as a sort of philosophy wouldn't be there. Essentially,
that's an interesting point. I have a few sense of my own on this depopulation thing. The first thing I thought about, I thought the tweet from Nathan was interesting, but you had this sort of predictable response from some of the I guess the more sort of pro-natalist crowd that is just, look at this death cult is perpetuating itself inside of the right-wing communities. We must be vigilant. It is just funny how we can never get out of this this kind of tangled these kind of Manichaean worldviews. It's not possible for people to see kind of the upside of a possible negative situation. I mean, as we've already mentioned, there are like a lot of potential upsides to population decline, like a higher salary, for example. This is something you're already seeing. Wages are going up for people, and you would think that that would motivate more of these young people. That's the sort of the weird thing that's happening here, is that like for the young people, they could get a blue collar job now, like a physical job, and actually get a decent wage for it compared to their grandparents, because boomer bashing is has become a tradition at this point in our communities, right? It's just everything is the boomers' fault, and we shit on the boomers. But I mean, you have to look at the reality of their situation, living in a kind of population growth environment. Right? The baby boom is essentially like a big spike in population, meaning you know, like the reason the boomers are talking about, yeah, you got to go to college and get your education, and you know, get liberal arts so you could get a Wall Street hedge fund job or something, that is ridiculous now, was a response to the fact that there were so many young people that wages for blue collar or uneducated work were pushed down a lot. So the way, if you'd wanted to make more money, you'd have to get educated, and for them, or for a lot of them, that's what worked. They were able to get an education, kind of distinguish themselves from the people without one, and then have upwards mobility through that. The problem is that when they have kids and like the next generations are getting smaller, then you get the opposite pressure. It's that too many people are getting the educations, and there's not enough people to fill these low-skilled positions. We've tried with immigration for a while, and we're sort of seeing that the immigrants themselves get sucked up in the same system, and their fertility rates collapses, or we can't integrate them properly. So that over time is becoming less of an issue. So right now, I mean, you could get a job as like working in a factory or just like a cleaner or something, and actually get a decent wage compared to your sort of like idiot boomer grandparents. But they're seemingly not willing to do it. It's a very interesting thing. I thought about another
Are
thing
you
as well.
sure
Yeah.
the wages have increased in real terms? I mean, maybe you're talking specifically for Norway, but even then, the inflation.
My impression, at least, is that like the comparable, you know, purchasing power you can get now for like a blue collar job would be better than what you could get, like say in the 60s, for example.
Okay, for like a real blue collar job, you're talking like
Yeah, I
an
mean,
electrician
even,
or something.
you know, I mean, that's where you're getting all of these. I mean, there is right now. I don't know if you want to say call it propaganda or something, but there's a lot of marketing of just trying to get people into doing these unskilled positions. I don't know if you've been to the
Yeah,
cinema
because the
lately,
government
but
has spent the better part, thanks to Blair, by the way, of like 30 years telling every single child ever born that you have to go to university if you want to be taken seriously, right? And then they paid you to do it,
yeah, of
for
course.
free, basically.
But I mean, it is just basic supply and demand economics. That is
of course.
eventually just going to be my core
and I
argument.
do
If
agree
you
with
have,
you that if you were to become like a real blue collar, like if you went out as a young man today and you were to become like an electrician or something, right, you would be making more money, relatively speaking, to like a boomer in the 60s by the end of your career. Absolutely, because the demand is there, right? But that's only because we've been fucking with the system for 30 years.
well, yeah, and there's fewer people to do these jobs. If you, I
Yeah,
mean, you could
exactly.
get those jobs as well, but say like the you know, just as a demand, supply and demand question, if you have fewer people to do the jobs and these jobs really need to be done, you can negotiate better terms and better salaries for these things. I mean, I'm getting a lot of sus comments on this. So next episode, we're going to have to come back and actually look at some data on this, because I don't have the
Right.
I don't have the tables ready. So maybe I'm
Nordanon
just
says almost all my mates from school went into the trades in high school, but you're from the North Nordanon, so that doesn't count. That's all. That's all you do up there, is just build houses for each other.
at least
Sorry,
like
yeah.
the messaging, the sort of government messaging that I'm seeing, not just the government and the private sector, is that they kind of desperately want to get people into these positions, and they're targeting Norway, at least ethnically Norwegian people, to do this. That's what I'm seeing in the ads. I mean, they could have put, have like black people in them and stuff, but I mean, I went to the cinema.
No, and anyone working in like big trades in Norway, anyone who's worked for like any of the big construction companies will tell you that like working with the poles and stuff like that is just the worst. So you need people who are Norwegian to either be foremen or to get the job done properly, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, people are talking about housing. That's of course going to be another one, but it's sort of not. There are other things. If you think about housing, sucks. Housing, that is just kind of a pain in the ass. But it's not just about inflation or the economy in general. It's really about like there's not being built enough houses to keep up with demand. But as the boomers die off, if the population keeps shrinking, that is also not going to be true. Or at least it's not going to be true if people are willing to move to the places where the houses are becoming available, right? Because the demand is not just affected by the total number of houses, but where people actually want to live. And I think there are less people who want to live in rural areas in general. It's harder to sell. And
oh yeah,
I mean, you could look at the price spikes. The people always focus on central areas, like in Norway, it's Oslo, Trondheim, and these city centers. That's where people want to live, and that's where you're seeing the prices rise continually. But if you start moving away 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hours away from these centers, the prices are dropping sharply. It's almost going in the negative direction.
Okay, but so I mean, we're looking at a difference in parameters here, I think, because I totally agree with you on that point. The problem is that that's not the house the boomers bought, right? They bought the house in the center of the city, right? On the same like relative
some of them
wage.
did. I think it's very, very easy to focus on the successful boomers, and
fair enough.
Not the ones in the middle.
What you're finding here, though, is that a lot of these older generations, they're coming up to retirement. They're in the city. They want to move to the countryside now for their retirement, so they buy the cheap stuff up. So in my town here, we're getting a lot of Londoners coming in.
Yeah,
and so then the young people here are forced out of here as well, even if they wanted to stay.
What's interesting is that where I live.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm interrupting. I just want to highlight something interesting. Where I live, it's exactly the opposite. You, when you retire as a boomer, what you do is you sell your house, and then you move into the city into a flat, one of like these new builds, and then sort of like shed a lot of the weight, so to speak, because the kids moved out, and house is quite empty. And you want to be around all the other boomers who are retiring because you want to go out and hang out with them. So that's what's happening here.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing as well. They're moving in centrally, or they're moving to cities that are overwhelmingly populated by pensioners. It seems to be like that in Western countries in general, that some city centers are going to be, there's going to be a lot of young people living in one city and a lot of old ones in another. It's a sort of unfortunate imbalance there, I think, in terms of just having like a normal experience of life in general. But there is, economic incentives that just make it like this. So, I mean, yeah, about the housing shortage, that's sort of the topic at hand. I don't know if I really have any more to contribute, but a part of the problem is, again, boomers now hogging up real estate that hopefully will be freed up if populations keep shrinking as they're doing. But it will take a lot of time to adjust. And of course, I do hope that there's going to be more construction in certain areas. It's tough, I think, particularly in Britain. I mean, we've done episodes on Britain previously, and it's tough because it's so densely populated already. I mean, people are talking about, we could still keep building it out. But if you look at maps of population density, like the UK is very dense, like compared to most of the other places in the Western world, really. So it's sort of hard to be general about this and say that that's not an issue over there. But if you look at sort of the Scandi countries, that's sort of not the case at all. It's quite undensely populated, and it should be possible at least to build out low-cost housing that would be, at least could have been bought at reasonable prices for the people coming up.
I think that's probably actually a legacy of industrialization when it took off in Britain, because you had this influx from the countryside into the cities where people could get the jobs because these massive organizations had made them redundant, essentially, and has continued. And it might be also why over here the pensioners are leaving the cities, because they're trying to get away from the densely populated areas to the spaces where there's a bit of space. But the other side of it as well is that although there is a declining native population in Britain, it's continuing to rise because of immigration. So we're not, even when the boomers die off, it's unclear to me if we're actually going to get the benefit in terms of cost of housing and availability of housing, especially when a lot of it's given away as social housing.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
sorry,
that's
Brits.
rough.
I wish I had some good news, honestly, but just because of the factors involved, like both the density and the super high immigration. I don't know if like this even applies. Like there's always seems to be another problem coming down the line for the Brits. They're very squeezed.
Yeah. Sorry, Nathan. You were going somewhere before I interrupted you. Did you get to make your point?
Yeah, I can't remember what my other point
Okay.
was.
Sorry.
Don't worry.
Dorza says, I went to a big construction site recently. There were no Norwegians working there. Well, you won't find a lot of those Norwegians who go into the trades on construction sites unless they usually sort of become foremen, mostly because these big construction companies do just import labor because it's cheaper, and they'll disregard the laws, etc., or at least try to. The sort of Department of Health and Safety or whatever is quite aware and usually go after them, but they try to skirt the rules as much as possible. Where you'll find a lot of the Norwegian tradies is just, when you need something done on your house. Like if I call a plumber, I'm 99% sure it's going to be like a white dude showing up. So that's where you'll find a lot of them. The sort of like the self-employed, as it were. You call it white van men in the UK.
That's right. Yeah.
The guys who just they own a couple of vans, and maybe there's like a business with like 4 plumbers or something, right? Something like that. Like very small
there's
businesses.
a small business, and they can usually lend their hand to a lot of different kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I guess they're associated with the Dino. Have you come across the Dinos?
I've come across the Dino, but only as a Twitter sort of meme. I'm not sort of aware of what it is in the context of the Brits.
Oh, okay. I mean, it's it's a bit like what you were talking about, actually, Ludicpath, with the kind of benefits of having a blue collar job. In terms of, these are guys who, I mean, the caricature is they have a lot of fake tan and the nice white teeth. They have a girlfriend who's very similar, but they're able to afford a house and a nice car, and that's what they're aiming for because they've got some of these jobs, and they kind of they're the aspirational class in the UK now. They're the Thatcherite dream of working your way up, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps because they have these blue collar jobs. So that they're resented, I think, in part because it's there's a certain shallowness to it. It's like, oh, I work 9 to 5 for the week, and then I go and get smashed at the weekend, and that's the sum of life. But also because they can afford to buy their house, whereas the guy that did 3 degrees, who feels he's got a superior way of life, can't. So he feels very resentful about the Dino. Yeah. So they're a good they're kind of an extension of the white van man.
I see. Well, yeah. So it's kind of like it's the illusion of high class, but it's actually low class, which is causing the people who ought to be high class to seethe, essentially.
I mean, this is what happened with after the Black Death. The aristocracy were really angry that the peasants were able to afford more,
Died.
and well, they were angry that they died because it meant they had to pay the other ones more. And so then what happened was they got Edward III to pass a law in 1349 fixing wages to pre Black Death levels.
Really?
And this eventually led to the peasants' revolt. So yeah, the aristocracy, I guess, face similar issues to your university graduate today in relation to the peasants.
Well, I guess I'm glad the university students don't have access to the same powers then.
I think we've talked about this previously, but you have like the Norwegian geopol professor and the guy, Asle Toje, he sits on the Nobel Committee, has talked about this in his books, where he talks about the precariat class that is composed of these sort of overeducated white libs who are underpaid chronically, and they work in media typically. I mean, he attributes some of this to like the insanity that you're seeing in mainstream media in general, that the people who work there feel like they should have more, in a sense, like they feel like they put in so much time with their educations, like their parents are diplomats or somewhere high up in politics, and they have they live in an apartment and they make shit essentially just writing articles, and it comes out in various ways in what they're writing about and how they're framing things.
Uncle Ted would call them the over-socialized, I think.
Yeah, that's certainly, they would fit into that group, but I think there's more to it than that. It's sort of like genuine. I think they feel on genuine, anxiety and neuroticism because of their situation, like because they're
That's understandable. Yeah. Okay. A little bit. I'm not sure if we're gonna talk more about this. If either of you feel like talking more about it, we could dive more into the peasant revolt thing, because I know you wrote a tweet thing, a thread that I showed briefly earlier, Nathan. Should we do that?
That tweet thread wasn't about the peasants' revolt, but we can
Oh,
talk
is this
about
just
it.
about Edward in general?
This was just about Edward and King Arthur, because you asked me
Ah.
about Arthur.
Oh, let's do that, because we can have that as a sort of like a cap on this, and
Okay. Yeah.
lead into more King Arthur shilling. Very excited for that. So,
Okay.
do you want me to read this and you can add information as we go along, or would you just like to talk and I can just scroll?
I'll just talk. I'll just present it. It might be a bit easier that way.
Sure.
So Edward I was the grandfather of the Edward III that I was talking about a moment ago. He's famously known as the Hammer of the Scots because he invaded Scotland and led to the execution of William Wallace, star of Braveheart. And he was associated with King Arthur in very prominent ways. He was probably the first king to really tap into the mythology. For a bit of context, well, before the context, I'll say this kind of tweet thread was inspired by the fact that Edward was involved in a ceremony on Easter Day in 1278, where they removed the alleged corpse of King Arthur from Glastonbury Abbey, which is in the southeast of England. And the context for this event was that was twofold. In the Arthurian tradition, established by kind of Geoffrey of Monmouth in the early 1100s, he wrote this amazing book, The History of the Kings of Britain, which caught on like wildfire. It was a bestseller in Christendom across the courts of Europe. People were reciting this and reading it and getting all excited about Arthur. And the presentation of Arthur within that book, which takes up about half of it, is that he's an empire builder. He conquers Britain. He unites it under him. He becomes the overlord of Britain. Then he goes to war with the Roman Empire and conquers France, northern Italy, and so on. So he has an empire, and people have suggested he's kind of like the British version of Charlemagne in that regard. He's
Right.
establishing an imperium. And Edward wants to tap into this because he has similar ambitions. He wants to have overlordship of Wales, and he wants to have overlordship of Scotland. And if he can, he'll try and conquer a bit of France. And so when he is actually engaged in some of these conflicts, he will say things like, I am, by virtue of office, not of blood descent, because being English, he's Saxon and Norman. He's not a Briton like Arthur would have been. But nonetheless, because of his office, I have the right to rule these places. And indeed, when it comes to Scotland, he actually writes a letter to the Pope with that argument in it, which I think is amazing. I think more politics should be based on that kind of argumentation. Like, okay, King Arthur ruled Scotland. I am the descendant of Arthur, therefore I should rule Scotland. That would be much better, I think.
Yeah, and then what happens? It's the you and what army, right?
Well, yes, yeah. But then the other reason for this event was in his battles with the Welsh. The Welsh, they are ethnically and culturally descended from the Celtic Britons, more so than the English. The English are a mix of Briton and Saxon, but the Welsh were the kind of last remnants. Their language is reflective of Brittonic. And so they really identify with Arthur, and they believe, due to various prophecies in Geoffrey of Monmouth's books and so on, that Arthur will return. And when he comes back, he's going to drive the English into the sea and restore the Britons, aka the Welsh, to their rightful place. So when they're fighting against Edward I, there's this common idea rallying the Welsh troops. Arthur's going to return and we're going to beat Edward. So what happens then on 1278? Edward and his wife visit the alleged tomb of King Arthur. That's at Glastonbury Abbey. They exhume the bodies. They see them. Arthur is described as being like a giant, and his and the Queen having the most beautiful bones of anybody, and which is a kind of strange comment, but I like it. And then they kind of leave them out for a day. They then seal them back in with the royal seal upon their tomb, but leaving out the skulls so that the public can come and venerate it like a relic. The reasons for this then, well, on the one hand, Edward's identifying himself as very closely with Arthur. I am his rightful descendant. And he'll go on to reaffirm this through holding his own round table festivals and tournaments and knighting other knights very constantly throughout Europe. But then he also is saying to the Welsh, look, I've just dug up your king. He's dead in the ground now. I've made sure of that. I've sealed him in the ground. He's not coming back. You've got to deal with me. And so it was quite a clever little political move that he was trying to pull here. Both on the one hand, affirm his reign, on the other hand, undermine Welsh resistance. So that's what he was trying to do with that ceremony.
It's pretty interesting that you're right here that Arthur's bones were of wonderful size, and Guinevere's were of great beauty as well. It's nice.
I mean, how do you judge the beauty of bones? I guess that's a question. But
that's a good question. Yeah.
But the wonderful size, that's interesting, because if you look at like the pre Geoffrey of Monmouth literature, it all says, well, a lot of it suggests that Arthur was from the race of giants. Now, this doesn't mean he was like 20 foot, but there was this idea of this kind of mythical race of being, the giant, who could be of varying size, but they're certainly more powerful than a normal man. And this is what enables him to go to battle with great monsters and so on. He's more like a Beowulf figure. I would say
Right.
Beowulf of the Britons, than he is a chivalric knight prior to the 1100s. So it could be kind of building on that sort of tradition.
Interesting. Is that why? Because there's like stuff in the Bible as well talking about like giants and like big guys in that way, isn't there?
Oh, like the Nephilim.
Yeah, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, you're getting deep into. I hate to say it, the lore, but
No.
there's also. But I'm also thinking about like David and Goliath as well. You know, just something like.
I think the
something
Nephilim is
so
like really
ubiquitous, right?
Nephilim is like really early in the Bible, though, isn't it?
It's
think
in
that's like-
Genesis.
yeah. So
It's confusing though, because at the same time, so that's in the earlier kind of Britain folk tales and legends about Arthur, that he's a kind of giant figure. But then when you get to Geoffrey, it has to kind of switch on its head, because he's building on certain stories that Britain was first populated by a race of giants who, and in slightly later works, these giants were descended from women who had been exiled from Greece for trying to murder their husbands, and then they started sleeping with demons, and that brought forth the race of giants. And so then the true founders of Britain are exiles from Troy through Rome, Brutus of Troy, and he kills all the giants. And Arthur is the descendant of Brutus. In a way, he's like Brutus reborn. He restores what Brutus established in domesticating and taming the land. So much so, even in those stories, he slays some giants. So it's kind of repeating the cycle. And some people have said, well, maybe these are somewhat disparaging comments on the Celts who existed prior to the Romans coming or whatnot. You know, they are the giants in this case, descended from demons. Yeah, so then how that fits with him being a giant, it doesn't quite sit right, if that's the case.
Interesting. I need to read more on this stuff.
One thing I was going to ask you guys though was because what I've been finding is that the King Arthur stories really spread across Europe quite quickly. Like we find in like the very early 1100s depictions of Arthur on Italian cathedrals, for example. So these are very earlier than visual depictions in Britain. Is there much of a kind of Arthurian story in Scandinavia? Did it kind of get up there at all, or is it not really a big thing?
I can't recall anything specific. No, it might be that it took the form of something else, and we also had our own sort of myths around our own kings who sort of christened Norway, as it were, and that might be why it's not big on King Arthur, or rather maybe some of it got conflated, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And you can see even in the some of the motifs in Arthurian stories seem to have had precedent in Norse mythology. So you have is it Sigurd who draws a sword from a tree that Odin planted there?
Right.
And only he can draw it, right? Nobody else can do it. He's been chosen. Arthur draws this.
Gamu or something is the name of the sword.
It's something like that, yeah. And then Arthur is the one who alone can draw the sword from the stone, and this shows his right to be king. So you kind of get these repeated motifs. Merlin has often been compared to Odin as this wandering, mystical character who's a bit
right.
You never know quite whose side he's on. And he's also got a very, like, he can see what's going to happen ahead. And obviously both stories end with the destruction of the the ruling powers, you might say. So maybe that's also why actually the Arthurian legends have a lot of, they're drawing on a lot of Norse mythology, or those sorts of stories at least, within them. So it might just be too repetitive to have King Arthur.
That's true. Yeah, as you said, there's a lot. We had a lot in our own history that would overlap too much. So if there were any traces of Arthur, it's been sort of baked into everything else that remains. All right. Well, I do have, unless we want to dive deeper into this, but this is a bit of a what do you call, like a schizophrenic episode in a sense. But I do have one more article that I'd saved just in case we got time for it. But it's a bit of a low-hanging fruit. It's on dating between men and women. It's some statistics and data on how women and men operate on the dating market, especially in the modern world. Would you both be interested in taking a look?
Yeah, I'm looking for advice.
Oh yeah, you're out hunting for love, are you, Nathan?
Yes, I'm. So if this can help me, show it.
We'll
It'd be
see.
great.
We'll see. So this guy is, I think he's a psychologist. I'm not sure. Yeah, okay, it says here he's a PhD candidate at the at Trondheim University or something, and he appeared on the National Debate show a couple of weeks ago. We talked about that on the Longhouse when there was a huge sort of fight between the feminists and some of the youngsters on the Norwegian right about, young men struggling to find dates, and actually that being a political problem, because what happens when you skew sort of. I've tried to make this argument before to a lot of people that marriage as a social or societal technology is sort of the great equalizer in terms of women distributing women to men and ensuring a more stable society. And the effects of modern dating seems to be undoing a lot of that by sort of reintroducing the women going for the top 1% and then refusing to mate with the remaining men. So this guy was on there and he did a good job, I think, because he's very much like, well, these are the facts, these are the results of my research. So we'll see what he has to say. The chronicle is called The Pursuit of Love, and it's advice for young men who can't have sex and women who can't get a girlfriend. And women who can't get a boyfriend. Translator. We seem to be in a bit of a heterosexual crisis. Men and women struggle to find each other, and they don't have children. Here are some tips and awareness raising for both men and women looking for a partner, as well as the authorities. They're women. He's lowering his requirements to sleep with you. Or standards, I should say. Your challenge is to distinguish between men that you have a crush on as a lover and casual sex. It is not true that men aren't picky. Men are quite picky about long-term relationships, but they lower their standards for casual sex. At times, so much so that, and he links to a study, he doesn't need to be attracted to you to get into bed. The hard truth is that he may have lowered his standards for you as a means of temporarily get excitement. It is after the sex that you get to meet his real demands, which can be as relentless as a woman's. The post-nut clarity setting in, as it were. The task is to identify men that you have a crush on as a boyfriend. I'm going to check the... you have a crush on, let's say, identify men that is in your range as boyfriend. In another newspaper, a woman asks, quote, "Why should I spend my time on small talk with one boy when there are dozens of others waiting in the inbox, in my inbox for exactly the same thing?" Well, the answer is that it's not certain that the 10, if not thousands of suitors in line are actual real options. Unfortunately, much of the colossal interest women receive on dating apps is, well, hot air. Men are initially sexually uncritical and swipe yes on most. Women become all the more when men are initially sexually uncritical and swipe yes on most partners, women will become all the more critical and swipe no to most partners, which makes men more uncritical. So it's a bit of a ratcheting effect. On dating apps, men enter a less selective state, but the state is temporary. If it's something serious, you have to turn up the pickiness. The online newspaper then follows up with, quote, "Does he look good in his pictures? Is the bio boring? Is he 2 centimeters shorter than you prefer?" Unquote. Well, although it may seem that way, most women can't afford to be picky about the centimeter. So there's hope for you guys, you short kings out there.
Hobbits
On dating
have a chance.
apps. Sorry, what?
English hobbits have a chance. That's what I'm hearing. Yeah.
Yes. Let's see here. On dating apps, women's task become to filter out the noise from the men who are genuinely interested. In your 20s, you're blessed with a sexual romantic market value that most men could only dream of. If you're in the city, young women can have loads of men on their hook without having to do anything special. This power is conditioned by youth, and youth declines with time. If you basically want a heterosexual monogamous life relationship, it might be a good idea to think about using the attraction capital of your 20s well. That's when you have the most bargaining power to get the relationship you want. This sounds very conservative, but heterosexual monogamous relationships are by nature a conservative affair. Not sure what he's linking to here, but something from Royal Society Publishing. Okay. And of course, if you, like most women in the country, are not in your early 20s, that does not prevent you from finding a kind and lovely guy, but the, quote, raw negotiating power that you used to have is not the same. And if you think I'm crazy for writing this, just wait and see for what I have to say for men. 2 men. All right, here's for the guys. 2 men, or 4 men. No matter how much bragging youth politicians... that's... that's the reference to the debate. No matter how much bragging youth politicians support your... It says lying case, but it means he's talking about your sort of lying down case. He's making a reference to sex. You are redundant from a reproductive perspective. Given that your theoretical least parental investment is the time you spent coming, you're inherently unattractive to someone who is 9 months pregnant. Your attractiveness starts in the negative, and then you can't take a mirror selfie and automatically be lovely like your sister could. You have to acquire the qualities that women want, and for many, that is hard work. Hard work requires time, and you have limited time. Use your time well. Ergo, get out of the manosphere. You hear that voice? The stuff you learn from Andrew Tate is mostly useless in today's dating market. When Tate teaches you to cage fight and walk with swords, I'm started kind of doubting swords are cool. He teaches you intrasexual competition, how to dominate other men.
As you just said, like, this is making me want to watch Andrew Tate videos now. I don't think this would work.
Unironically, that sounds kind of cool. Dominating men worked 1,000 years ago because she could not choose her partner herself. When women have free... That's a bit reductive. When women have free choice of partner, you must not win over other men. You must win her over. Big thanks. Traditional masculinity gives you primarily influence over men, not over women's desires. Women tend to go for men who are dominant, who are usually, going after a successful man in modern society, meaning successful in terms of job or personal economy, etc., means that they are dominant in some aspect or another. Wouldn't you agree? It's just using sort of money as a proxy.
I think these traits would overlap quite a bit.
Yeah.
But of course, there is some point where I think it would work against you. I think, it would be kind of difficult to deal with kind of on a social level for women, at least in the long term, if you have this kind of what you call the triple type A personality. sort of hyper competitive thing. It's difficult, I think, to mingle it with family life.
Sure, but there's saying that it should be negative is well. What he's saying, you will get more out of taking an empathy course than going to a boot camp in Romania. Well, I think you'd get more out of most things than going to a boot camp in Romania, but I think it's too simple to reduce it into like just don't do masculine things. That's kind of stupid.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the boot camps are coal, unfortunately. I mean, for those of you who have read the game or some of these books, they could teach you tricks, a lot of gimmicks, like. But they even talk about that in those pickup artist books, that like they would find some technology they would go out in town and try to use to bring women home with them. And after that got popular, everybody does it, and then suddenly there's like an immune reaction within the entire space.
That's true.
Whereas like
yeah.
women are just not biting anymore. So you have to be able to do more than just these kind of gimmicky strategies. Like a lot of it has to do with just the willingness to put in time with this stuff, I think. And of course, I don't think these things are mutual either, depending on what the boot camp is. But a lot of these sort of PUA stuff has to do with trying to understand like the female mind and so on. So I don't want to like I rag on this red pillars quite a bit, but there is useful stuff there. Like
Oh yeah.
If this guy is going to come out and say that you get nothing out of it, that is also wrong.
Yeah. Fubar201 says he's throwing it. Is it a tongue twister? We weave witty words as weapons to woo wonderful women. Try it, Fubar. I'm not sure. Women probably don't go for poetry anymore, do they? Give her a good old limerick. She'll love it. Research shows that apps do not work very well, and our data shows that they affect men's loneliness. It is also difficult for men to be perceived as attractive in still images when they are strangers to a woman. Rather, meet women in social settings. Now that's good advice. You have greater attractiveness potential when you get to present your whole self, and you can also, you can be funny, and you can do stupid shit and get away with it and impress her. So meet women in real life. That's a good.
And bring a friend.
And bring a friend.
I've said this before. Like social proof is king usually. I feel like this is. If you don't have a friend, you should go on the dating app and find another man who could help you wingman or something. Because, like you said, if you're an unknown man, and it's hard to appear attractive to a woman if she doesn't know who you are. But it really helps either if you're introduced by someone in her friend group, or you have other people with you to just kind of prove socially that you're not a loner. It's a kind of insurance policy for them to just use some indicator that you're not socially retarded, essentially.
I was going to add as well, I think, because the article was mentioning like dating apps beforehand in terms of swiping right and having unrealistic expectations. And I do think there's a thing of like, if you're actually in person with somebody, you can feel more into them if you've got that interaction going, if there's a bit of chemistry going and so on, compared to when you just see it online. That might be somebody you would have swiped past straight away. So I do think
Certainly,
that kind of internet aspect of it does actually reduce even further your possible options in that respect. So meeting in real life is super key to that.
Yeah, I don't think I ever got through a dating app. I think I was born just in time, so to speak, that I managed to get by without using any dating apps. I did download one at one point, swiped a bit, and then never opened it again. So I got lucky. To the authorities and contractors, work to prevent boys from dropping out of school if women choose men based on socioeconomic position, which I would argue is a proxy for, his ability to dominate to a certain extent. School dropout has an impact on men's chances of getting a partner. Support research on dating apps. All right, the fucking PhD candidate says support, give monies for programs. Heterosexual couple formation has always been complicated. We're in a time where it's perhaps more complicated than ever. Well, I feel like we did it to ourselves, though. We made it more complicated than it used to be. That's just the feeling I have. It's very strange because he's like really throwing the red pills at the women, and then when he gets to the men, he's like, "Yeah, but just be nice. Don't be an incel." Very strange.
I think the most useful thing he said was the negative value stuff. That is actually true.
That was the most. That is very true. Interesting. All right. Well, before we leave, I would like Nathan to tell everyone listening about King Arthur Day, where to find it, when to find it, and what to expect.
Thank you, and let me just say first, thank you for having me on again. It's been a real pleasure. Yes, King Arthur Day is going to be the 25th of May. That's a Saturday. It's going to be a day of streams and videos, exploring and celebrating the Arthurian tradition, trying to understand what is it about this character which has intrigued us for over 1,000 years. Why? What is it that? What does it express about our cultural spirit as Northern Europeans? Already got a great lineup. There's going to be some announcements as to that. And if you're interested in getting involved, feel free to send me a DM on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter. There'll also be updates on my YouTube channel as well. So keep posted. And yeah, look forward to seeing you all on the 25th.
Very good. It's not there right now, but I will include a link to your Twitter and your YouTube channel in the description down below as well, if anyone is looking for either.
Thank you.
Bloody Path, anything you want to tell people about before we leave?
Yeah, praxarchy.com. Read it.
praxarchy.com, read it. Very good collection of dissident sort of writings. It's changed from a bit of a publishing house to a collection of all of the things that are being written. Of course, some people still place things behind their Substack, but it's a very nice sort of aggregator these days. Great place to check out.
And some of the best original posts, I believe, as well.
Oh, very good original posts. Yeah. Read Chimpanzee Politics on praxarchy.com by Nathan C.J. Hood. Very good. What's the latest thing you wrote that appeared here? Let's see. A new heroic archetype moving beyond Tolkien. Still one. I haven't read that. I'm going to read that later.
I think you'll like that, especially given your Witten speech. Was it last
Probably,
year?
yeah. I ended up quoting you actually in that speech because I was working on it and it was too perfect, really. It was a match made in heaven, so to speak. Okay, well, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you for hanging out. And we will be back next week. I think we have scheduled Dissident Nomad to come on next week to talk about South Korea. And we talked about sort of burning the candle at both ends here in the West today. South Korea seems to be a nation that has been burning the candle at both ends for quite a while, and the candle is quite small to begin with. So that's going to be interesting to learn, to get a bit of like a boots on the ground perspective from Dissident Nomad, who has been in Korea for a while. Thank you for watching. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.